Thank you, George, for joining. I know that we have been moving this one for quite a bit of times. And thanks for being really flexible and accommodative. And then thanks for also joining on the morning of Pacific times, very early, maybe for you in the day. Um so I think for the people who are on the podcast who are listening this one, George is like a very popular open source maintainer. He's like known for his open source Mac OS terminal app called iTerm. iTerm is a very popular tool for developers. I think we all work on terminals day in and day out, and iTerm2 is a very popular tool that everyone uses it. I could not mention it how many times that we all use all sorts of shells, all sorts of plugins, tools, everything, but one single interface that we all forget probably it is iTerm2. And then I'm really glad that we have George here on the podcast. Hello, George.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So glad to have you. And then I think I'll just quickly hit it running. Like maybe for the interest of audience, maybe you could give you a quick summary or like what you do for a living, how the item project start or something like that.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So I'm self-employed. I've been doing iTerm as my full-time job for a couple of years now. Prior to that, I worked at WhatsApp for a couple of years. I worked at Google for a while before that. So I've been in the industry since 1998, which is it's a long time. The project got started is kind of interesting. I was at the time I was working at Google, and I just started working on web search. And my job there was to run a program that would take 3 days to complete. And it would go over, I forget how many billions of web pages, and do some processing on them. And it was the most frustrating job that I've ever had because it would often fail after 2.5 days, and I would have to start over again. And the only way that I could be productive was to do 10 things at the same time. And I was using Apple Terminal, and it was driving me absolutely nuts because there was no way to change tabs with the keyboard. And I was like, I can't do 10 things at the same time if I have to use the mouse every time I want to change tabs. So I looked around, I found that there was an open source terminal called iTerm. I downloaded it. I could change tabs. I was very happy, but it was unbelievably slow. And so I said, well, it's open source. And I'll go figure out why it's slow and I'll fix it. And so I fixed the problem. It took a week or two. I sent a patch to the maintainers, and they never responded. And so I forked the project and published my changes just in case anybody else would want it, not really thinking that anything would come of it. And people started filing bugs against me. This was on Google Code, which was before GitHub came along. This is the best thing we had back then. Was based on Subversion instead of Git, but it had issue trackers and all that. So people started filing bugs. Some of these bugs are legit. I'll fix them because I'm still thinking the project is just for me anyway. And then there was an article in an online magazine. I can't remember which one. It's like iTerm is back, and I was like, oh, all right. I guess this is important. So I'm going to do a 1.0, and so I started engaging with the community and fixing more bugs and adding features. Eventually, it took, I don't know, maybe a year or so before 1.0 was released, and got a huge response. It's been a much bigger hit than I had ever expected. And so I'm still doing it for myself because I love doing it. And I always wanted to have a terminal emulator that I could hack on. And I think it's awesome that other people like it too.
Pretty interesting journey. I mean, things like these don't happen every day. And then, I think it's interesting journey. But then more on that as well is how do you is there a monetization thing with iTerm2, and are there it's like a foundation people donate to? How does it work? Maybe more can you share more?
It's donation based. So the program itself is GPL licensed. It was when I took it over. That license will never change because I don't know who the authors were before I took it over, and then after I took it over, the copyright was assigned to Google. So we're we're in GPL land, which is fine. I like GPL, but I'm not going to be able to release a closed source product or an iOS app because of that. So that limits the monetization strategies. This is my job, so I've got to try to put food on the table using this thing. Donations, I absolutely can't believe that it works, but it works. It's not the same as big tech, but that's okay. I like it a lot better. And the way donations happen is somebody was like, "Hey, would you please put a donations link up because I want to give you something?" I'm like, really? Okay, I guess. And then donations just started coming in. I was like, oh my gosh, software engineers are amazing people. It's very generous, and so I created a Patreon, Google sponsors, and that's where most of the donations come in. And there's a lot of individual donors who contribute through PayPal, and they don't really receive much in terms of benefits from donation besides a good feeling. I haven't tried to, make lots of content only for sponsors or do anything like that. I want donations to be because people are generous and they want to donate.
Yeah, I mean, I think GitHub, after GitHub sponsors, a lot many people started thinking about it, like to donate work and to donate to tools that they use. And this is something that I've been doing to other tools that I use. I think probably I should also do it for iTerm. I haven't visited the page or so sometimes, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty, like I said in the beginning, right? I kind of like whenever I get a new MacBook, I kind of install, the first thing that I install is not a browser. I install a terminal, opening the Mac terminal, and that's the only time that I use the Mac terminal. So it's kind of like a interesting project and interesting tool. But getting ahead in the conversation, the journey has been fascinating in a way for anybody, right, who is trying to build over open source and then survive and like continue to see their project grow. Uh, you know, what sort of patterns have you seen, like when developers interacting with terminal emulators, like they want to ask, like, say, hey, can you build a plugin ecosystem so that we could write plugins? Hey, can you, like, are there like big features or things like that?
There
uh,
have been some really interesting stories. And so iTerm has an API where you can write Python scripts that control the terminal. And the reason I created that was back in 2016, I was leaving Google and I interviewed at WhatsApp. And the server team said, "Hey, can we talk to you?" I was like, "Well, I'm a client developer, but sure." And so I go to a conference room and there's every server developer there. And they're like, "We love iTerm. Let me show you how we use it." And when they wanted to make a change to their production system, they would use AppleScript to create a window with 300 split panes. And they would broadcast input to all of them. And then they would run commands and sort of scan to see if there were any errors. And they said, "Well, the problem is we bought more servers, but you can't create more than 300 split panes." And my reaction was like, "That's insane. I can't imagine anybody actually using the program this way." Um, but it worked for them. It obviously wasn't going to scale forever. And they're like, how can we get more processes? Like, okay, there's so many things that need to be better to support what you're trying to do. The first is like this AppleScript is a mess. AppleScript is not a great language, right? It's almost older than I am at this point. And so it had lots of problems. The architecture of the app was never built to have that many sessions. So I came back from them and I was like, okay, there's a bunch of things I need to fix. And it took many years to get around to all of it. But that was very motivating because I often see people doing extreme things that I would never have guessed that they would do. I think this is true of all software, right? Users are so much more creative than developers. And so seeing those things really highlights where there's room for improvement.
yeah, that's interesting. I think the entire, like, automation features have been really interesting for item 2 for someone like me, I think, who want to do this shell thing a bit more. And but then how do you kind of like see the automation has evolved now that with AI powered tools, it looks like
Mm-hmm.
terminal itself is like becoming more mainstream. I have a friend who's who's been building something like called gen command, so that like the commands get generated. It's more like in a autocomplete on steroids, something like that. But then there are new terminals. I could not resist myself asking this question, like, say there are so many AI powered terminals now. I think Warp, Wave, I've been talking to them a few weeks back. So there are more terminals, and I think, but then iTerm is like my still a great product. So in
Mhm.
general, so how do you think about all the AI thing happening, and what do you see about it for iTerm?
So I added a couple of AI features. Was released over the summer. I'm just one developer, so I can't reimagine the whole terminal from the beginning and start over. And I don't think that that is particularly useful. I use AI all the time in my development because I work alone. Just having someone to talk to makes such a big difference, because sometimes I'll try to solve a problem and I'm kind of stuck. And honestly, just phrasing the question is often enough to get me unstuck. So just having a conversation partner there is amazing. But then other times, let's say I'm trying to do something like I'm fighting with automake, which is my personal least favorite thing to do in the world. Then I will turn on the AI features in iTerm and be like, look, I'd want to build OpenSSL, and there's a feature called Concierge that runs in the side panel where you give it a goal, and then it can suggest commands. It can see what's happening. And so it'll say, clone this, run configure, and then configure will give an error. It will see the error. It'll be able to respond and say, oh, it's because you're missing this dependency. Go download this package. And so it walks you step by step through this, this thing that I never really wanted to do in the first place. And it makes it a lot less miserable. So I find a lot of value in AI there. It's also super useful for writing code, but I don't think, or at least I haven't come up with a good way to integrate that into the terminal yet, because maybe you write code in Emacs or Vim. Emacs and Vim need to have that integration because they've got access to the full buffer and all of the context that you're working in. Uh, the terminal is more like a browser. It doesn't have enough information to really do that job well. Now, there's also a feature where you can type in an English description of the command you want to run. So rename all txt files to .doc. You can hit a key. It'll use AI to convert that into a command, and it'll put it in an editor where you can check it before it executes. That's really useful too. I can never remember how to do battery names in Unix. Right? There's like all these little Unix things that are possible, but you can't remember how to do. So I get a lot of value out of AI in that area as well. So I'm always looking for new ways to expand it. People are very creative in what they've come up with ways to do. I think my main concerns are, privacy is a big problem for a lot of people. I'm sure if I was still working at a big tech company, it would be incredibly frustrating knowing that there are these amazing things out there that I can't use because all the code is proprietary, right? I can't share it. I can't share any information about what I'm doing. So local models are one solution to that. A lot of people use Olama, which is easy to run on the Mac and is privacy respecting. So iTerm has support for that. I'd love to add more, but I'm looking for places where there's lots of value. I don't want to waste my time doing things that aren't going to have a lot of bang for the effort.
Oh, that was like the right approach in general. I think I've seen a lot of AI features, tried a lot of like AI products, but I think like something that really moves the needle, improves the productivity, and like I mean, even if it's like a wrapper that people call, but then still it's a lot of value, right? I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what AI codes generally do you use in your development workflow, like in building iTerm2?
Mostly I use ChatGPT.
Okay.
Because I'm used to it and I know how to talk to it, and they've got a pretty nice Mac OS app as well, so it's very convenient to use. So I have it write code. Sometimes I have it do code reviews, and it's actually really good for debugging too. When you get maybe an error message like a stack trace you don't understand. I had one case where I was trying to debug a problem and it just didn't make sense. I gave it the stack trace and it pointed out that there was a function that the only way this could happen is if the function was reentrant. which was very hard to tell from looking at it. But once it had that insight, I was like, oh, okay, that explains everything. I can fix the bug. And again, it's one of those things where just having someone to talk to work through your problem makes such a big difference.
Yeah, of course. I think I've been hearing this from a lot of these individual developers where even for CodeRabbit, a lot many people buy one single seat. And initially we were like, we don't know why people were buying one single seat for a product that's maybe more team centric. Maybe a couple of people would raise PRs and somebody want to review the PR. But it means that like people want to review the code. And then sometimes when there were not so many people, and then it is interesting to kind of like get a review opinion
Mm-hmm.
in your workflow, and then probably run like linters. In fact, actually, I would want to say that there is like some sort of tonal instructions or tonal settings that you could do on the reviews, and then people play it around very interestingly, and then it gives you interesting review outcomes. So yeah, so I think maybe if you haven't tried, you should definitely give it a shot. But
Yeah, I'll check that out. Doing code review on yourself is impossible. I'm not even going to lie and say that I do a good job on reviewing my own code, uh, because every time I've gone through a code review, it's not fun. They're finding problems and pointing out things you should have done better, and it's painful to the ego. So having a machine to do it is great because it'll be honest. It's not like it's probably fine. Uh, and I think it also hurts the ego less. It's just the machine's opinion.
Yeah, but then no, I think I see that developers are, I mean, in general, especially senior developers, mostly concerned about, hey, I think I just don't want to hear a plus one types of opinion, because like AI confirms your reality, your bias sometimes, right? It doesn't kind of
Mm-hmm.
like generative AI like would not probably challenge you unless you ask it to challenge yourself, so
Yeah.
there is that sort of hallucinatory problems, and fact based or grounding it to a specific sort of a truth problem, especially with code and all.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I get it. I completely get it.
It's all the great thing about working, coding with AI is that, especially as a solo developer, I get to feel more like a senior engineer, uh, where I'm, asking it high level things like, please, implement a binary search or whatever it is I need. Then it can go do the grunt work, and then more often I'm reviewing its code, and that process, you know, I get a lot out of it because I'm understanding the problem better, because I'm trying to find bugs in what it wrote. So the code reviews, there's actually a lot of value going in both directions.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really not going to lie at the same point that for this specific podcast, and I was thinking, I was reading more about iTerm. I myself like a user, but I have a bias, and then I have a lot of knowledge that I know, and then probably I make questions around it. And then I went to Claude, and then I asked what sort of like questions that I could probably ask for a terminal emulator developer, and then Claude gave me a lot of ideas, and then it was very interesting the kind of different perspective these LLMs can throw to us. And also it differs. I do agree. Maybe I wish there are more larger models that we could load onto the system. The reasoning, the larger the model, the better the reasoning, and the better the outcomes. So I think still maybe like proprietary models have an edge, but then I get it. I think yeah, local models do help.
What I really want is a model that can learn. If you could give it your whole code base and then ask it questions about it without everything having to be in the context window, that would be such a game changer. Because what I would do with iTerm is I would just remember all the commands you've ever run and the context around them. And then it would be able to suggest the next command. Maybe it would infer what it is you're trying to do, right? You could show it a diff. I think, for something like ChatGPT, yeah, there are some models with giant context windows, but the performance is terrible. So it's not really ready to be that sort of very intelligent assistant yet.
Yeah, I think there've been talks about, or like there are several benchmarks that talk about needle in a haystack and things like that. But then I think when it comes to there is no better validator than a real world people and use cases, right? I think people validate much better
Mhm.
than a benchmark end of the day. maybe can be like, tested upon a specific score, and then, you could probably look at
And the
it.
models know about the benchmarks, right? Like there's thousands of articles about needle in a haystack, so they're cheating probably.
It's an interesting thing as well. I think maybe the model knows and then knows how to kind of like hack the benchmark. So, so about maintaining, right? I mean, in general, an open source project is not easy, especially a successful open source project and a maintainer. People think like, oh, well, there were always more users than people who could send contributions. And then at some point, people are like, why does this guy doesn't respond? Or like, while you might be going through your own thing.
Mhm.
Um, how do you manage like, reviewing PRs or issues for item 2? And is there
Yeah.
someone who helps you maintain the website, or releases?
No, it's just me. I I haven't done a good job of getting other people, involved as developers in the project. And I don't know if it's me or if it's the particular project and the technologies involved. I actually don't mind. I like working on with a small team. Two is better than one, but once it gets above two, it starts to be more communication burden. Uh, so I don't mind. I think the project is, still mostly Objective C. It's 23 years old at this point, so there's no way I can go back and rewrite everything in Swift. Uh, like I'm not going to live long enough to complete that task. Uh, Objective C is the most hated language in the TOB index of languages. They do that survey. So that puts a lot of people off. I do get pull requests though. I think people get their, whatever thing it is that bugs them, and they're going to go figure out how to solve it. And some people like learn the language enough to get their change done. I try to prioritize PRs because I know how much effort people go to. Um, Issues, on the other hand, we're up to issue 11,000 something at this point. I've read every single one. Many of them take hours or days of work. I've been doing this since 2010. It's something like an average of, I don't know, 3 issues a day or something for 14 years. So that's exhausting. I won't lie. I'm tired of issues. I wish there were no bugs. But adding bugs is so much more fun than fixing them. It's never going to end. So, I prioritize my mental well-being, and sometimes I'll just like take a week off because it's a free product. People's expectations need to be reasonable about how long it's going to take me to get back to them. And I try to be timely, and I try to keep an eye on the things that have lots of comments. That tends to bubble up to the top of the inbox. There's a thread with 30 comments, like, oh, maybe something's on fire. I got to look at that. And there are jerks on the internet. There always have been. I've been dealing with jerks online since I was in middle school on BBSs, and just ignore it. Don't let them get to you. Yeah, it's you have to take some distance, and doesn't really matter. Focus on what's really important, right? Like, somebody has a lot of feelings. That's fine. You know, as a parent, I'm used to people spewing feelings, and you have to just acknowledge that, and then try to get to the heart of the problem. And maybe someone is raging about how a bug hasn't been fixed for a long time. Like, well, let's figure out why the bug hasn't been fixed. Like, there is probably a real problem at the heart of all of this. We're going to get to that and solve the problem, and just make progress, because I don't have the time to try to fix people.
No, I think that's been like, a familiar thing that I have heard over and over from several maintainers. Big projects, small projects, projects that are like getting a lot of traction, and then I think it's really common, and then it's something that people should also like know, and then I think that open source folks are understanding. But also, it's good that iTerm is in a place where not everybody would come and submit a PR, but then also like someone who's like extremely like thinking about that, a bug or a problem, and then would want to do it. I would want to ask this particular thing, like say from your, like I said, you spoke about models, all these AI things, the coding tools and all. I would want to ask more questions on how do you like use, like say, think about in future about how this AI thing would pan out, for especially for developers. What is your opinion?
Hmm.
Because you've been for so long, you have seen a lot, and you're seeing something like Swift, and
Yep.
you also like put it in like Apple script and all of that, right? So I think would love to know more. Yeah.
I think, I've heard LLMs described as a calculator for words, which I think is a really good metaphor. Uh, if all you have is a calculator, you're not going to do any interesting new research in mathematics. But you probably aren't going to miss your minus signs the way you would if you were just doing it all on paper, right? So I don't see it as like robots are going to take over the world, kill all the humans, and have a much better society. Maybe that's pessimistic of me, but I see it as another tool that's in our tool belt that lets us be more productive, right? Like I get a lot more done because I don't need to go write binary search by hand or whatever it is I'm trying to do. I can have somebody else do the grunt work, and I can review it. I can make sure it's good. And so it's saving time. This is obviously still early days, and it's going to get a lot better. I think the way it's going to impact developers is they're going to be more productive. My suspicion is that you're not going to get uh, large language models that are, as smart and creative as humans. I think it's always going to hit a wall. I think that language is not actually the way that you get to general AI. Maybe they'll get there some other way, but I think that's too far off to speculate about. I think we'll get better and better LLMs. We'll get bigger context windows and more functionality like web search. Like I think it's going to keep growing in those directions, and it's going to keep being a better tool. And I think what's going to happen for developers like me is we need to provide the context to the AI system so that they have enough information to do their jobs. Right? We're always going to want to put them in a silo so they don't have access to everything in the company, right? But they have access to the source code that's relevant to this project. And so how do you do that, right? Like, are you going to need to tell it, there's development environments where you can say, like, here's my project, and it can go read the code and reason about it. And for a terminal emulator, you have to think of like, what is the user doing? What context does the user have in their head? And it's even more than that because they probably have multiple projects that they're working on. They may or may not be doing editing in the terminal, but they're probably running Git commands or they're SSHing into a server and doing maintenance. And so wouldn't it be great if the terminal had a way of providing enough context so that the AI could be helpful? Like, hey, here's a folder with a bunch of markdown documents that describe what our on-call procedures are. And then the LLM sees that, like, oh, you're SSHing into a server and you look at a log and there's an error. Here's how you should, deal with that, or here's a suggestion for fixing the error. So I see, my role is providing more context to the AI to be more useful. What hasn't happened yet is I don't think it's really shook out how that should be provided best. Sticking it all in the context window doesn't feel quite right to me. And so I'm kind of waiting for the AIs to evolve long-term memory before I really know what that's going to look like from the terminal perspective.
Yeah, it looks like memory is one another dimension that a lot many people were working. There are several startups, people who are working on trying to retain at browser tab level, right? At least to
Mm-hmm.
retain and re-inject that. And there are not so many frameworks. I think people are working on agents more than all of these things like that. But then I think hopefully we do much different, not only scale the architecture, but also scale the ways in different formats. Maybe we will also compress. I think the same thing that happened with databases or several other areas would also come to LLMs as well. like you're talking about literally ACLs, right? Literally, the access control and all of that has ever existed in the kernel and in the Linux space, wherever. So I think similar sort of frameworks or tools should be there. So and then I am really excited to see terminal being the core area where all of this will originate, and that's something so exciting for someone who's interested in terminals and terminal apps and things like that. But then yeah, I mean, pretty interesting journey, and more about iTerm. Would love to kind of like continue the conversations, and then see what AI has to give us. So I really thank you. I mean, you've been really generous in your time as well, and thank you for doing the podcast with me, George. And would definitely want to work closely and help see how we could also grow item community, and then do more with the open source.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our chat and I'd be happy to do it again.
Thank you, George, and see you soon again.
Okay. Bye.